Here at 105.5 WDHA, it's Jim Monahan. I have two guests with me this morning. Lindsay Berra, that last name better be familiar to DHA listeners, and Sean Mullin. Lindsay, Sean, good morning and welcome to DHA.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
We're talking about the brand new film, It Ain't Over, which is about, as I said, you should know the last name Berra, Lindsay's grandfather, Yogi. Lindsay, there's a line in the movie, Joe Girardi talks about everybody thinking, how much your grandfather was everybody's grandfather. So I'll ask you, what was it like with everybody's grandfather actually being your grandfather?
I didn't know that he was any different than anybody else's grandfather, right? Like when I was a kid, his job was to be a coach of the Yankees, but I didn't know that that was any different than anybody's other, anyone else's grandfather's job as an accountant or a school bus driver or a owner of a restaurant or whatever. So by the time I was old enough to understand that Grandpa Yogi was also this really famous guy, Yogi Berra, he'd already been Grandpa Yogi for so long that I say a lot that Grandpa Yogi and Yogi Berra don't often meet and shake hands in my mind. They kind of occupy two different parts of my brain, even though I'm certainly old enough to understand now that they are one and the same. So my memories of Grandpa Yogi are like making meatballs in the kitchen ahead of all the holidays, and him burning hot dogs at all of our family barbecue and watching fights with them, and him coming to my hockey games, like normal grandpa granddaughter memories. And then Yogi Berra is the guy who, won 10 World Series and had 18 All-Star game appearances and a bajillion RBIs and all that stuff.
At what point in your life did you come to realize, whoa, this guy could play?
Honestly, like I hear stories all the time from people who actually had the opportunity to see Grandpa play. And especially now that people are seeing the movie, a lot of people come up to me and say, oh, I was a kid and I was at this particular game at Ebbets Field or Yankee Stadium and I saw him do this thing. So I'm still getting an appreciation for just how great he was. The numbers speak for themselves, but when people tell you their own personal stories, it obviously adds a layer of like reality and an emotion to those stats. And every day I get wake up calls to just how tremendous of a player he really was.
Sean, as a director of the film, how much of a baseball fan were you?
I'm definitely a sports fan to start off. I mean, I grew up in my first 9 years. I was in Indiana. My mother is a Hoosier at heart. And I tell people I'm half Mick, half Hick is what I tell people. So my dad's an Irishman from New York, and my mom is just from Indiana, longtime Hoosier. So grew up with a lot of basketball, actually. And then, but in Indiana, if you're like baseball, which I did like baseball as a kid, you root for Donnie Baseball. You root for Mattingly. He came. He was from not too far where I was from. So I did root for the Yankees as a kid because of Mattingly. Then I ended up moving to South Florida and I kept kind of rooting for him. And then, off to college up at West Point, and I went to grad school at Columbia. So I spent a lot of time in New York. So a big piece of my heart belongs in New York. And now, obviously a big part of my heart belongs with both the Yankees and in particular, number 8.
Lindsay, when I was a kid, my cousins and I vividly remember drinking Yoo-Hoo because Yogi endorsed it.
I probably should apologize for that because I don't think it has any nutritional value.
I'm going to be really honest with you. I didn't like the taste of it, but if it was good enough for Yogi, it was good enough for my cousins and me. One of the things that I got out of the movie was the relationship that your grandfather had with Branch Rickey. And what I didn't know was the path that could have taken Yogi to Brooklyn instead of the Bronx. And as the son of a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, your grandfather broke my mom's heart a bunch of times. I won't hold that against you. How much do you think the story would have changed had Yogi Berra been a Brooklyn Dodger and not a New York Yankee?
I mean, it is totally crazy to think about that stuff. Just for the listeners who don't know what you're talking about, Grandpa went to an open tryout at Sportsman's Park in St. Louis in 1942, I think, with Joe Garagiola, his pal from across the street. And Branch Rickey was then the general manager of the St. Louis Cardinals. And he offered Joe Garagiola $500 to sign, and he only offered Grandpa $250. Told him he'd never be more than a minor league catcher. And that broke Grandpa's heart because he had always wanted to be a Cardinal and he wasn't going to sign for less than what his pal Joey got. So he passed. And Branch, though, had this bigger plan in motion. He knew he was going to leave and go to the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he wanted Grandpa to be his catcher there. So he was holding out to sign him once he got to Brooklyn. And in the interim, one of Grandpa's Legion coaches knew a scout with the Yankees and alerted George Weiss, the Yankees general manager. And by the time Branch got around to offering Grandpa a contract, Grandpa had already signed with the Yankees. So, I mean, he could have been a Cardinal and he could have been a Dodger. And obviously history is very different if either of those things are true. But the Dodgers could have been the dynasty that the Yankees were.
Yeah, exactly. Wouldn't have broken my mom's heart so much. And I love the one line Joe Garagiola has in the film about, as you're growing up, you're the best player in your high school, or you're the best player here or there. I wasn't even the best player on my block.
Yep.
Because of Yogi Berra living across the street, which is just a wonderful story. Sean, let me go back to you for a second. You mentioned the United States Military Academy. You played soccer there, right?
No, a version of soccer called rugby. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all good. No, I grew up playing a lot of sports. I did play some soccer growing up, actually, but no, I got recruited to play football at West Point, tight end, and they recruited 4 tight ends my plebe year, and I ended up shifting over to rugby. And I played rugby all 4 years, and kind of fell in love with the sport, and it also fed that kind of love of sports that I've had my whole life. So
your career took you from the United States Military Academy to stand-up comedy to film directing. How did all of that happen?
Well, it's a typical route, It's pretty standard. Yeah, I took the fork of the road came and I took it. No. I mean, tongue in cheek, I joked that West Point's the best film school in the country, because really, at the end of the day, directing is about leadership and inspiring people, and obviously West Point's a great leadership institution. But no, I did comedy actually in high school. Even I did like stand up and sketch comedy in high school. So by the time I got to West Point, I was kind of like the joker that didn't really fit in there, and that also helped me bond with Yogi, because he never really fit in as well. And so and then yes, I was stationed in Germany in the late '90s and as an artillery officer, a lieutenant, and then I finished my time in the New York National Guard. There's a big armory on 68th and Park Avenue.
Sure.
I was the plans officer for that unit starting in summer of '99, and pretty cush gig, actually. It took the M79 bus. I lived on the Upper West Side. I took the bus in my uniform and got a bunch of nasty looks from people in my uniform in Manhattan, getting a free ride. And all of a sudden they wanted to shake my hand after September 11th. So that's a story for another day. But I ended up serving as the officer in charge of the soldiers down at Ground Zero. I was a first responder on the day of the attacks, and I spent almost 9 months down at Ground Zero. And I did stand-up comedy at night. And so, yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing. And while I was at Ground Zero, spring of '02, I got accepted to Columbia's MFA program in film directing. Decided to, after going through everything I went through down there, I decided to tell stories for a living, and got my master's in film directing, and then moved to LA in '06, and been hacking away ever since.
And one of those stories that you're telling is It Ain't Over, the Yogi Berra movie that has a limited release to start, but there are a bunch of theaters in our area: Clifton, East Brunswick, East Hanover, Rockaway, and Montclair. Lindsay, your hometown. One of the things is I was going through the movie, and then I read a couple of other articles. I was wondering, based on the way your grandfather negotiated various contracts with the Yankees, there's one classic comment I think he had to George Weiss. George Weiss was saying, well, you made some extra money from, the World Series. And Yogi said, yeah, and I had something to do with that. Mm-hmm. Do you think he would have made a good player's agent?
Oh, goodness.
Because he was a smart guy. We have this,
really was.
We have this caricature image of him, but
nobody has ever asked me that question. So props to you. Grandpa actually, he played 18 seasons in the big leagues, and he had 18 one-year contracts. He never wanted to commit himself because he didn't know how he would perform that year. And if he did well, he wanted to be able to negotiate more money. So yeah, he really was very smart and very savvy. And he had an attorney, but he usually did most of his negotiating himself. So maybe he would have made a good player agent. Although it might have been hard to get a deal done with him because of that crazy sense of right and wrong. He probably wouldn't have been willing to make any concessions, and they would have been on strike a lot.
How much money, based on the career numbers that he put up, the 285 average and the home runs and the RBIs, what kind of money do you think he would have made in today's game?
So this is a common debate on the Twitterverse, in baseball Twitter, and the best answer I've gotten from the Twitterverse is that he would have been unpayable.
Yeah, I think
too many wins, too many individual accomplishments. You can't. I mean, if you want to pay for a World Series, he's got 10 of them, like unpayable.
I think the most he made in one season was 65,000. Is that right, Lindsay?
60.
Wow.
That was only 1 year. Most of the years it was 45, 48, 50.
Yeah.
And one final thing before I let you both go. The Jackie Robinson stealing of home in the World Series is a big part of the movie. And one thing I don't think I've ever heard anyone say is the umpire was out of position. How could he have really made the call?
He couldn't have.
No, Yogi said that. Believe me, Yogi said that.
And the batter who was at the plate actually was interviewed and said that he thought Jackie was out and he was demoted by the Dodgers like the day after. I always say, though, a safer out doesn't really matter. What matters at that point is that Jackie was in the big leagues where he belonged, really paving the way for the civil rights movement in this country. So I try to look at it with a bigger picture point of view. And your grandfather's role in accepting players of different cultures and color is in the movie as well. It Ain't Over on the 12th of the month, coming out, and a number of theaters in our area. Again, Clifton, East Brunswick, East Hanover, Rockaway, Montclair. You can find all of the information at itain'tovermovie.com. Lindsay Berra, Sean Mullin, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking with you. Best of luck with the movie. It's a great movie, by the way. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Everybody get to the theater.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.